Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Andy Norton. I'm joined by my colleague, Joel McIntosh, and today we'd like to spend the next 45 minutes looking at hybrid working and maximising team effectiveness. Just before we start, I just want to give you a little bit background information about ourselves and the format of this webinar. In a second, myself and Joel, we're just going to turn our video cameras off so that you can see the content on the screen. You will still hear our voices during the course of the webinar. And also, if you've got any questions about any of the content or want to share some perspectives, if you use the Q&A tab, that's available at the bottom of your screen or on the right hand side of your screen as well. We have tried to disable the chat function, so you shouldn't be able to use it, but if it is there, make sure it says chat to everyone rather than just the panelists, which is myself and Joe. So a little bit about myself, Joe, and GRA then. We've been training and using training interventions to improve the effectiveness and growth of businesses for the past 30 years. We are primarily designed to work with teams, individuals, and organizations for training intervention, looking at leadership management and the interpersonal soft skills. We have a range of different tools that we use. I mean, traditionally, we were very much physical trainers in the sense that all our delivery was delivered in a physical sense, i.e. in face-to-face, either by traveling around the 28 countries over the last 5 years, delivering indoor training, or using outdoor experiential learning at 2 of our dedicated outdoor leadership centres, one of which is at the National Football Centre at St George's Park, and the other one is down at Wokefield Estate near Reading. However, with recent months and years that the pandemic has brought us, we have now moved into larger modalities, bringing in live experiential virtual training and also self-paced e-learning content as well. So that's just a little bit about us to help contextualize what we're going to be talking about over the next 45 minutes.
And as Andy mentioned, we have been operating now for the last 30 years, and predominantly that was face-to-face. Yeah, so then, as we all know, COVID hit. Around about this time last year, we're almost, I guess, at the anniversary of it, and like for so many other businesses, everything changed. And as I was thinking about this little webinar, I was thinking, the analogy, and I suppose it was kind of like a massive dust storm. Dust sandstorm that has kind of enveloped us, really, and we, to a degree, once we realized that there was this COVID thing going around, we could see it on the horizon, see it coming. Maybe we hoped that it was gonna miss us, but certainly we probably wouldn't have known how far into it we were going to get and how long it was going to last. And I guess the analogy is kind of like for most of 2020, probably so many businesses were probably just kind of trying to get their bearings, right in the middle of that dust storm, kind of get the bearings, think about where they are. And I suppose now that we've got a little bit of a roadmap out, the dust is settling a little bit. We're kind of wondering what it looks like now. How have things changed? What does work life and life even look like to a degree moving forward? We saw something recently, which was an MIT report suggesting that, or saying that, of the people that they polled, and it was quite a large number, really, from across the globe, 97% of people have, people's jobs have changed in some way. And really thinking about in terms of what that means as well in terms of team dynamics, and for even the people that maybe they think that the degree to which their job has changed is maybe less around well, I'm still kind of going into work in physical work the same as I was before, but I suppose the question is everybody else, so therefore has the structure of the team changed, those sorts of things. So there's, as we know, you don't need us to say it, there's been significant change. And when we're thinking about this, it's not just about how our business operations has changed over the last year. It's also about the fact that we work so closely with organizations and our clients, with the fact that their businesses have changed. the effect of that, therefore, is that the needs that they need us to help support them with have changed as well, and maybe even the modality with how that kind of goes, how that kind of gets satisfied has changed. So, what we were wanting to show really in this webinar is, I guess a bit of the learning that we've had over this journey, and pose some questions just to kind of, I guess, get you thinking, how has this manifested itself within your organisations? One of the things that we've really been asked to do a lot of and help organisations with over the last year is around clarity. People are talking to us and asking us about, well, and whether that's because of the nature of how people's working life has changed in terms of where they're physically working or who they're working with. There's been a lot around clarity, and one of the other kind of things that we've heard and probably heard more of in the latter half of last year and into this year is this idea of kind of hybrid working. So with that. I guess what we were thinking, what we have been thinking about and asking our clients is, well, what do we actually mean by hybrid working? And what do you define that as? And it's interesting that even when we think of hybrid working, what we found is that quite often people will jump straight to hybrid working at home. Which is quite interesting in terms of, well, is hybrid working just about that, or is it about that element of choice, and what is allowed? I guess what have we discovered about this new hybrid world over the last year? And one of the things that we're starting to hear more of is maybe that there's a difference between individual effectiveness and team effectiveness in this new hybrid kind of post-pandemic world, and the extent to which maybe the worries that maybe employees, leaders, employers, leaders, team leaders, managers have had around if we're not seeing everybody face to face, how do we know that they're still being productive? One of the things that we were hearing lots of from organizations is that to a degree that that has been put to bed, and that actually a huge amount of trust has been discovered, and that's certainly required for this more hybrid model. But what about team effectiveness? To what extent has the team effectiveness question, been answered? And what does that team effectiveness kind of thing look like now? What is team effectiveness in this hybrid? In this post-pandemic kind of world that we live in, so when we think about team effectiveness, what are the new challenges that we're faced with when it comes to team effectiveness? Have new issues been highlighted by this pandemic that weren't there before, or has just the pandemic shone a light on things that we possibly already knew were issues with team effectiveness, but the pandemic and how we're working now has really kind of shone that light on it. So, what we're going to look at really is, that idea around team effectiveness in this session, and what we mean by, I guess, what can we do to help support businesses with team effectiveness and increase, I guess, increase performance and productivity, really. So. One question to ask yourselves is, thinking about that idea of hybrid, how would you describe how you're working at the moment with your organization? Is it hybrid? Is it a kind of, and and maybe a barometer of that is thinking, how much choice do we actually have here? So therefore, is it hybrid, or is it just, it's an imposed choice? So it's not like a mixture between one or the other, and there's very little choice there, and it's just different. And that analogy of the dust settling, what can you see as the probable way forward or new world that you're going to be working with when it comes to teams, and what does that mean for team effectiveness? And so what questions, I guess, have you got around team effectiveness that you kind of think, actually, maybe that's something to be curious about in the next kind of, I guess, few months, really.
Lovely. So for the remainder of the session today, we're going to look at two concepts. So that what essentially Joe was referencing there too is, has the pandemic shone a spotlight on issues that affect team effectiveness that were already there, but as a result of enforced either different working conditions or remote working, then, what are the things that will ultimately, whether we're remote working or working closely together, increase team effectiveness? And we'd like to share with you something that we've worked very closely with clients in and have itemized as we feel are the 4 pillars of team effectiveness. We'd also like to share with you some top tips that we hope that you could take back into your organizations that will help bring these 4 pillars to life and give you some really concrete takeaways that you can apply and consider when looking at your own team. So we're going to begin. Joe's going to take us away with the first pillars. We'll round up and we'll review them all. As we're going through them, if you've got any thoughts, perceptions, questions, just pop them in the Q&A box or in the chat pod, and we'll be happy to go through them as we can.
So where it starts for us really, and this is again referring back to something I mentioned earlier, that the request from clients. So much of the theme has been around clarity, and it starts for us around this idea of clarity of purpose, and thinking about maybe the opportunity that the last year has provided many organizations is to think, what is it we're really here for? What is our purpose? What's our raison d'etre? What we're here to achieve. And when we're running these kind of courses, we quite often say to people, you've got to start thinking like a Spice Girl and think, what do I really, really want? What do we really, really want? What are we really, really trying to achieve? And are we clear on it? Has it changed? Has the pandemic changed us to a degree? Or has, now that we kind of think about it and we reflect back, has it got a bit muddy? Certainly when we think about our organization, over the years, it was very easy for us just to start to kind of, branch out to a degree, but certainly add other things into our offering. And then almost when the pandemic hit, it was like looking back and thinking, well, actually, where does that fit? Is that what we're really about? And one of the things that we've been really getting people to think about with their teams is, the team purpose. And is it clearly defined? Can we write down our team purpose in 3 sentences? And if we were to ask other people in the team, would they write down the same 3 sentences? And so therefore, there's a question there around how are we communicating our team purpose out? If it's changed, recently, how have we communicated that change? Because for the next following, we feel that for the next following pillars, this is in many ways the starting point. If we don't get this bit right, it's then very hard to get other bits right. And to what extent are the alignments between individual teams purposes aligned towards the overall team purpose? So often we get asked about, can we increase people's collaboration? Can we increase team art? The challenge is our team doesn't collaborate. We kind of wonder how often the case is that just like individual teams or departments or areas of the business, kind of what they're working or the purpose or the thing that they're driving for, the thing that they're coalescing around has become somehow disjointed from the overall purpose, or they're just, or it might not become disjointed, they're just not seeing it, therefore that influences their desire to collaborate with people. So how aligned are all of them? And then, like we said before, checking and rechecking of that purpose, and probably realizing as well that, as we've seen over the last year, that this isn't a static thing, and that these things do change. And how often do we check in with, what is the purpose now? What's the team's purpose now? And this isn't to say that we want to be lurching from one purpose to another, but there might be subtle things. If you think about, team dynamics, a team that first comes together, well, the purpose of that team might initially be just to kind of get to know each other. By the time you get into them knowing each other and further down the line, the team's purpose may have changed in that it's far more task focused. But how often do we have those conversations and articulate that as something that's real and that we're kind of going through? So that's the first one. Then moving on to the second one, is the idea around, and again, purpose is quite important with this, is thinking about, balanced teams. And, one of the things that we quite often see, and when we ask teams and, what's your team's purpose? And it's amazing how often teams can't articulate that, because they think, well, actually, I'm not sure what team I'm in. Are you talking about who the team is that, what we have in common is my line manager, or, with projects that I'm working on at the moment? So really being clear about kind of, these things and being quite flexible with them allows us then to, have more choice. Because, one of the things when we talk about personality profiling and creating balanced teams, quite often the comeback to that is, oh, well, we've got who we've got. We can't create the perfect teams now, because we've got who we've got. Well, by what barometer are we measuring that on? Is that because, which teams are we talking about? Because that then, I suppose, offers up the opportunity to think more, I suppose, creatively around, well, the teams of people that we're going to create for any given purpose, how much choice have we got over that? Therefore, how much can we start to apply things like thinking about balanced skills, balanced knowledge, diversity of thought and approach, and really working, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses, to create kind of really good team dynamics. So this is certainly something that we've experienced, in the pandemic, is that, our team has massively changed over the last year. And how we're working and leaning on each other has changed. And, we probably did get into a state of being a little bit territorial to a degree around who was in which team and who therefore should work on which parts of the business. That's all been in some ways obliterated now. And actually it is so much more about, okay, we're all in this together. It helps that we are a smaller team at the moment, but we're all in this together. This is what we're trying to drive for. Actually, who now are the best people to bring in to complement skill sets? So, that's where there is potentially quite an opportunity for probably, we feel, more businesses to do that.
Lovely. So the third pillar that we tend to focus on is, once we've balanced our teams and we have our clear purpose, is sharing the mindset. And I think there's a lot of work here that maybe is not necessarily given the time and space that's needed. Rather, there's an assumption that because of the working culture that exists in an organization, people will have the same mindset, when actually what we need to do is just have an open, shared discussion, regularly checking in order to create an us and them rather than an us versus them mindset. So the idea, right, how are we going to go about it? How are we going to challenge assumed constraints? How are we going to keep each other in check and make sure that we're all ultimately pulling in the same direction? And, what are the common goals? How are we going to measure the fact that we are, working towards this? I mean, the terms of fixed and growth mindset have been around for many years now. And it's interesting in the light of the pandemic, how many people are, aching to get back to how things were before, and who are looking to innovate and move forward. But equally, an example from our own organization is we had MS Teams in for about 2 years before the pandemic, and we probably didn't use it as effectively. I remember being on conference calls where people were sat at other ends of the room, and if they wanted to come and talk to us, then they had to walk across the room. And now we're at a stage where we're very much better connected. We use a range of different applications and video conferencing software. But does that mean we stop? Does that mean we stop growing because we're now, or do we need to regularly collaborate? And actually, we have a weekly huddle, a virtual huddle, where we try and challenge pre-existing working practices so that we continue a growth mindset framing in order to go forward. So, this test and understanding is really, really important. And, testing understanding can only happen when there's conversations about it. And what breeds from a mindset, what breeds from thoughts and feelings? Well, behaviors do that. And we probably spend quite a long time working with organizations and getting them to think about creating self and team awareness, and what are the behaviors. So within the L&D world, we love an iceberg. So we have the mindset and we have the culture and the values underneath, but actually it's the bit that sticks above the water that what am I observing my team my teammates, my colleagues doing, and my leaders doing, and my team doing, and what am I doing that's helping or hindering our ability to work effectively as a team and achieve our tasks. So I think it's fascinating. I think when we're running team development programs as a business, I think sometimes the hardest question we ask our participants are, what are the effective, what do high performing teams, what are the behaviors, or what are the behaviors leaders need to utilize in order to get the desired results of a high performing team succeeding? And, is there a lack of clarity around, around purpose? And Joe mentioned before about purpose almost being the foundation. And, what are the behaviors that are then bred out of miscommunication around the purpose? And what are the behaviors that are bred out of an unalignment within the mindset as well? So, having that open, honest dialogue and the safe failing and non-judgmental space that will allow for these behaviors to be written down and practiced.
So with these 4 pillars, we kind of, believe that these are kind of enabling conditions. These are the enabling conditions for team effectiveness. And in many ways, I guess it's for us to kind of, challenge ourselves now with, and for organizations to challenge themselves with, okay, if we see that there's any validity in this, or we kind of, there might be additional pillars that we add into this for, specific reasons in specific organizations or sectors. And either way, the question then becomes, okay, how do we fulfill them? If these are the kind of what we want to try and, achieve to enable team effectiveness, what does that mean for the how, and how can we do this? And that might be the link to, hybrid working, around, to what extent is it about where we're working from or how we're working versus actually being able to, cover off these things and create these enabling conditions. Because if they're not enabling conditions, they could quite quickly become disabling conditions. So these things flipped on their head, as Andy alluded to. Sorry, Andy, I was about to call you Angie there. But Andy alluded to, could potentially be disabling conditions. If we don't have that clarity of purpose, if, subtle things like if people see, if we can't, and this is a really interesting thing that you could do, is go and, go and get a few of the people that you work with and just say, right, what team do you work in? And write down your team's purpose in 3 sentences. And then, see if you're in the same team, compare and contrast, and just think, okay, well, if we haven't got clarity here, what is the consequence of that? We also kind of think that to these points, they need to be consistently reviewed and adapted. As we've seen with, what our experience has been over the last year, is that, things change. And, if we don't change with them, then we very soon, well, the worst case is go out of business. The organizations that have been stuck and on their locked into their trajectory of where they're going, have probably been the ones that have found it hardest. We quite often say that there's 3 types. The pandemic has demonstrated 3 types of organizations: those that make things happen, those that wait to see what's going to happen, and those that wonder what happened. And so, I guess those that make things happen, it's really about, having that growth mindset. For instance, a fixed mindset attitude would probably think, right, we'll do this, so we'll create our enabling conditions, and then that's it, we've done it. But actually, have we? And also probably a sign of a fixed mindset would be things like, or hearing people say, oh, I can't wait to get back to what it was like before. And yeah, whilst there will be aspects of what we had before being necessary and preferential, how much of that is actually going to help us in the new, I guess, in the new world that we're kind of moving into. So I guess a question for you to reflect on and think about at the moment would be which of the 2 terms, growth or fixed mindset, best describes your organization currently. What have you seen? What do you hear most of? Are people striving to it's not always, I guess, even embrace the new, but just, accept that this is, things that have changed, and move forward with it. And or are people, stuck in the past, unable to move on? So one of the things we thought might be quite useful would be to think of, a few tips that we've noticed and that we've been talking to some of our clients about recently that relate to some of these pillars. So our 8 top tips for team effectiveness, starting at number 1, which is that be clear on your team's purpose. Can you distill it down to 3 sentences? How in sync are your 3 sentences when you compare it to other team members? So as I mentioned before, as a little task, what you could do is write down your team's 3 sentences, and or what you think the purpose of your team is, and then get other people in the team to do the same, and just notice, what's the same, what's different.
Okay, so tip number 2 is to ensure everyone is aligned on how the team can be effective. So it's differing slightly from the team's purpose, but integrally linked. Can every member in your team articulate what it takes for the team to be effective? And as Joe mentioned, when we were rounding up the 4 pillars of effectiveness there, that should be a continual conversation. If we look at like Tuckman's model for team development, for instance, when we're going through the forming and storming phase, perhaps potentially those questions are being asked because we're trying to get new people to working together more effectively. But actually what we're saying here is this should be a continual conversation. When anything changes, either externally because of an environmental market or internally in terms of pressures and priorities within for that team, we should be asking the question, are we all aligned on how we can be the most effective that we can be?
At number 3, avoid echo chambers in your team. So can you identify the different skills, the different personality traits and perspectives in members in your team? Can they in each other? Do we embrace diversity of thought, a diversity of opinion? Do we work with it, or do we see it as a problem? Do we see it as a barrier? How healthy is the debate? How frequent is the debate or the questioning of approach? Is that encouraged or is that discouraged? Yeah, how much do we notice this going on? So, and again, a little barometer of this would be to, whether it's a little team exercise or not, or something, is just going to get team members together and say, right, what do you know about each other? What do you know about each other's preferences? How do you think each other like to work? And obviously the more advanced version of this would be looking at some of the personality profiles or psychometrics and things and incorporating those. But there's a difference, and we've always seen this, and I'm sure you have as well, there's a difference between knowing this information and acting on it. So we might know that, people intrinsically are different and have different, personalities and approaches. How well do we enact on that and encourage the debate around that, or the discussions around that?
Tip number 4, embrace healthy debate. So, is there a level of safety within the team that allow people to speak up and challenge that status quo? Respectfully challenge, but also be respectfully challenged. Because I think it's often you see in teams there's a real emphasis on respectfully challenging, but maybe taking that time just to establish the ground rules within this team's culture so that people can react when being respectfully challenged as well as challenged. So, how do we create that levels of comfort that allow for this to take place? Because like Joe said, I mean, prior in our own organization, maybe previously we were a bit territorial, a bit precious about certain functional skills within the organization. And then, when people challenge those, that feeling could be not, could be felt, and that drives behavior as well. So how do we get to the place there where we continually have a healthy debate?
Building an us and them culture of collaboration. Do teams in our organizations typically take responsibility for their mistakes, or do they attribute blame to others? How open are teams within organizations to share resources and communication channels? This again goes back to purpose? Is that something that's sometimes misaligned? But how open to an us and them culture are we? Or unconsciously or in practice, do we have an us versus them culture? And what's the impact of that?
Tip number 6, challenge limiting beliefs. This idea of assumed constraints and challenging, just because it didn't work last year doesn't mean that it won't work this year. How often do we hear, oh, that's not the way we do things around here? So often there you see more limited beliefs around fixed mindset adoption rather than growth. But really check in, and maybe the best place to start with this is at home. So have a look on typical day. When do you find yourself falling into the trap of people suggesting things and you go, oh yeah, that won't work because of this? And it really sort of diagnose what that might be in terms of, well, is that an assumed constraint? Is that limiting my thinking? Or actually, when we write it out on paper and we look at it properly, maybe we could do that. And maybe just because it didn't work 6 months ago, we know we got a different team, or the economic situation is different, it might be worth. So can we continually have a process and have a culture and a mindset shift towards challenging limited beliefs?
Big one, this one for us in many ways, is setting expectations early and holding people to account. What is the lag time between issues occurring and being discussed within our team? And what does that lag time get filled with? So a couple of questions there. First of all, how comfortable are people, and we've said this before, to kind of raise issues, and how do they raise the issues, effectively or ineffectively, I guess. But equally, this idea of the sooner that the lag time between raising the issue or realizing there's an issue and raising it can sometimes be an indicator to team effectiveness and team dynamics and the culture of that team. If the lag time is getting longer and longer between individuals raising issues within the team, then that could suggest that there are unresolved issues there which are getting in the way. And therefore, what's the consequence of that lag? And and that lag that kind of gets created between identifying the problem and then raising it, what does that void get filled with? Very rarely in our experience does it get filled with nothing. There's usually a few things that gets filled with, and again, what are the impact of those things? And catching it early. It's amazing how catching it early can really make things so much easier. Yeah, we've had plenty of experience of this, in our organisation, of kind of catching things, probably both early and late, and the consequence of those. So I guess another barometer to think about would be, how quickly do we think in our organizations issues get raised? Is there a lag time?
And the final tip is connect regularly and embrace technology. So and this is almost a balancing. We had a conversation within our own organization about, could we be using technology more effectively? And I think the outcome of that conversation was yes. There is probably more utilization of software packages such as Adobe and MS Teams that have apps based in there, which allows for more collaborative working, the reduction of silos. But there's a very good point raised that, how many ways can people get hold of you? And if there is a plethora of communication methods, text message, WhatsApp, email, phone, MS Teams, WebEx, can that be a little overwhelming? So can we connect regularly? Can we embrace technology? But can we do it in a way that allows people to feel the value of this approach and not feeling overwhelmed? And do we treat people within our team as individuals, and within that, strive to communicate with them in a way that they like to be communicated to? And I think this is a pivotal in performance now within the global economy. We talk very much here about teams, local teams, teams that regularly work together, but obviously there's cross-functional teams. There's how these teams fit within the organization on a national or global scale, and actually how we check in with our team within the local within Europe, but you might then have responsibility to check in as part of a larger global team. So how do we connect regularly and have those impromptu conversations that might have only taken place physically, but now we need to try and create a method for doing it virtually?
So one of the things that we'd like to do is kind of, we're kind of almost getting towards the end of our allotted time. So one of the things that we'd love to set you a little bit of homework for those that have listened and that have stayed with us is to think of these three things. So with the enabling conditions of the four pillars of team effectiveness in mind, clarifying purpose, balanced teams, shared mindset, and aligned behaviors. Interview some of your teams about these things, specifically around, team's purpose. Are the members of your teams, their interpretation of your team's purpose the same as yours? Where are the gaps? Equally, you could say on an individual level as well. What's your individual purpose, and having a conversation with, can you write that down in 3 sentences and have that conversation with some of your leaders. Identify 2 conversations that you think you need to have that might be holding the team back, and think, right, have we had, have these issues been raised before, and or have they not? Has there been a lag time here? Are we noticing a bit of a lag between knowing that there is a bit of an issue and actually raising it? And what does that lag get filled with? What is in the way, in the space, in that void? And then finally, what you could do is with the top tips that we highlighted there, the 8 top tips, think of a bit of a scale, and think if you noted any of them down, as a little bit of a barometer, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, yep, we do this incredibly well, 1 being not so well. How are you with these things? How are you getting on with these things? So, it would be great to hear from any of you who have stuck around for this, to see how this manifests itself in your organizations, maybe even to have a discussion around those 3 bits of homework. I guess would be really quite interesting. And yes, to understand your scores. So, thank you very, very much for kind of sticking with us. We're a little bit early in terms of we're due to 45 minutes, but we'll let you get away for an earlier lunch. Most people like that. It was one of the big top tips on a training course I heard once, is that if you end up finishing 5 minutes early, then that usually gets you big points. So yeah, if you are interested in inquiring further about some of the stuff that we've been talking about today, then there's inquiries@gra.uk.com, or have a look at the website, and that's a mobile number as well. But from me, thank you very much for listening in. Hopefully it's been interesting and you got something from it.
And for me, thank you very much for listening in as well. It'd be great to have some conversations and gain some unique perspectives about how you're getting on within your organization. So please feel free just to reach out to us, even if it is just for a chat about what we've covered. Other than that, thanks very much now, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care.